Well, hey, Department of Defense fans, welcome to, welcome to our webinar today. My name is Jake Milstein. I run our events here at Critical Insight. Today, we're talking about CMMC. And if you don't know what CMMC is, you're in the wrong place, or DoD, or any of those other acronyms. So, hello. One of the things that we've done several presentations on CMMC, and today is a really special one because somebody who you met at our last presentation is Dustin, and he took the beta exam about CMMC. And today he's going to show you what he learned, because for your organization being here, you want to know what he has to do on the test, because it helps you figure out what your path to compliance looks like. So first of all, welcome everybody. There is a chat on the right if you want to tell us where you're joining from. We always love to know where people are joining from. And we have a half hour today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So there is a chat on the right. Let us know where you're joining from. I am in a basement in Seattle. You can mute the chat if you want. If you don't like the little bloop bloop, there's a little bell on the top. If you hit the bell, it's muted. Everybody will get a recording. If you registered for this, you'll get a recording. Additionally, I just looking at the deck that Dustin and Fred put together here. Some of you are going to want the deck. We'll send out the deck in a PDF in a follow-up email. If you need it more urgently and need it today, just drop me a line. I'll put my email address in the chat. So, who are we? Critical Insight defends critical services, including anyone who works with the Department of Defense. We know how critical you are to the nation's security. And we provide cybersecurity as a service by helping organizations prepare for an attack, detect an attack quickly, and respond rapidly when one happens. Today, the folks who are talking are Dustin Smith, who is one of our lead consultants here at Critical Insight, and a newly certified CMMC professional, which is what we're going to talk about. Fred Langston, one of the founders and chief product officer, and he's done a ton of work in the CMMC realm. Also, I didn't put him on the slide, but Mike Hamilton is also joining us, who's the other founder of the company, and he has the background on the government machinations around CMMC, so he'll be throwing in color and a couple of questions. And then the really, really good-looking guy on the right here is me. I host our events and speak publicly, usually at hospital and public sector conferences. So today we're going to start with what's the exam Dustin passed. The good news is he passed. If he had failed, we'd still have the webinar, but we wouldn't ask him questions about how he passed. We're going to talk about the history of CMMC. We're going to talk about the compliance process. And I put Q&A at the end, but if you've ever been to any of our events, we just pepper in Q&A as we go. Use the chat to ask questions. If somebody says something where you're like, wait, what? Or have a question, put it in the chat, and one of my roles is I'll ask your question. Okay. So, Dustin, you took this test. Tell everybody about the test. It's a beta test. What is it? What did it look like?
Right. So the Certified CMMC Professional is one of the exams that the Cyber AB, the organization that's been entrusted by the government to run the CMMC program, this is one of the certifications, the first one that they're offering. They're eventually going to offer the Certified CMMC Assessor, which is going to come out this next month. But the Certified CMMC Professional tests your knowledge in the CMMC program, all the supporting materials like the assessment guide and the scoping guide and the regulatory and legal requirements that have created the CMMC, and it's all the DFARS and executive orders involved with CMMC and DFARS, and then what the requirements are for actually protecting federal contract information and controlled unclassified information. Some of the domains, well, there were 6 domains for the exam. So there was the CMMC ecosystem, how it all works with the assessors and consultants, got into the ethics, because you can't do a certified assessment on a company and also be their consultant because there's conflict of interest. And so there was a lot of scenario questions around that and how to be ethical. which is a good thing. We need consultants out there to have good ethics. And the governance and source documents, so the assessment guide, the scoping guide, all those requirements that are involved in being compliant with DFARS and CMMC, and how the assessment process is laid out, and the different caveats to what's allowed to be put on a POAM, and how much time do you have to remediate those, and what needs to be assessed physically and not remotely. And there's a lot of these details that's good to know if you're trying to create your CMMC program and prepare for that assessment. You want to know how that assessment's going to be completed, and so you can prepare appropriately for it. And then scoping, which is one of the most important things you can do to prepare for a compliance assessment, especially CMMC. Having a good idea of what type of CUI and FCI you have in your environment, where it's located, what people are using it, how it's being used. And so you can create that boundary and understand what's going to actually be assessed and how you implement the controls. So having an exam like this, I think, is a great thing for the CMMC industry, the defense industrial base, because it provides this base level of knowledge where people that are implementing CMMC, it just shows that you know how to do that from the beginning up until your certified assessment, and you make sure it's done the way that the DoD wants it to be done.
And hey, so Dustin, how did you get to take the exam? I mean, this is a special beta exam. Were there surprises on the exam?
So it was a beta exam. Nobody really knew what to expect. I mean, they provided a list of the domains and the different topics, but how the questions were going to be asked was a surprise. It was scenario based. It was similar to how the CISSP questions are presented with scenarios, and you have to pick kind of the best answer. Some are really close to being the correct answer, but there was they would test your ability to answer like ethical questions, but also different scoping scenarios, because there's so many different scenarios of companies, whether they're hybrid, completely have a cloud and enclave, or on-prem, or so having, and then there's different types of CUI. And if a company's trying to separate their FCI from CUI, these are just different things that get thrown into the questions to try to get you to determine what's the best answer for making sure they're compliant with the assessment. So you can take that as a consultant and make sure that they're compliant to it, or as an assessor, you can determine whether they're meeting a control or not. So those type of questions were difficult because you really had to analyze the situation and pick the best answer. I'm guessing there are going to be some questions that are going to change because they just rolled out the official one. They took our results from the test and made changes to make it better. So it was beta tests are always more challenging than the official tests, but I feel good about about being able to contribute to the official test.
And so, for companies that are trying to become CMMC compliant here, are there any are there any surprises that people should know about, or if they're already on the path that they're on and they've done the things that they're supposed to do, they're still on the right path? Was there anything in there where you're like, oh, folks need to know about this besides what you already said?
For people that have been keeping up with what's being put out about CMMC, there's no surprises. All this information is on the government website. It's being put out by the Cyber AB. And if you're working with a consultant or someone that's in your organization that's been following these things, it's not a big surprise. This is more about testing your knowledge of those things. You are required to go to a licensed training provider to be able to even sit for this exam, and it contains all that information in it. But you could also get that information outside of the training, which is what I did, because I took the training, but I also spent a lot of time researching all this information about the CMMC program and working with clients to get them compliant. So if you're brand new to this and you try to sit for this exam you have to take the training, but it's going to be new to you in that training. if you haven't had to deal with this. There's a lot of background with regulatory requirements. You have to understand the different categories of CUI and how that applies to your organization. And then you kind of start from there and start your scoping process. And scoping there can be a lot of surprises with scoping. A lot of times clients find out they have CUI in places that they weren't aware of, and including like cloud applications and
Sure.
managed service providers. And then now that question comes up of, well, how do we get them compliant, or do we need to find new external service providers? Those are
Yep.
the big surprises.
Okay. Great. And you talked a lot there about, CMMC. Fred, can you just give us a quick refresher on why we're talking about CMMC 2.0? And, can you just give us a quick refresher here? And folks,
Sure.
remember, if you have questions, go ahead and toss them in the chat.
Sure. Kind of how did we get here and why do we care? So back in 2015, there was a supplement to the federal acquisition regulations. In other words, the requirements to do business with the federal government, called DFARS, or the Defense Federal Acquisition Requisite or Requirements Supplement. So it's a supplemental guidance document 2015, and it said you need to be compliant if you're going to do and contract with the DoD with NIST 800-171. What is NIST 800-171? Well, it's a set of standards. In particular, Appendix A was the really relevant part that you needed to focus on, or the supplement A. And it had a list of requirements. And those requirements were a modified version of what the government makes itself adhere to, which is NIST 853. The moderate baseline, in fact, because there are different baselines within it. The moderate baseline is what the DoD is supposed to be adhering to, and the people that do business with have the analog in NIST 800-171. The irony of this whole thing is that at that time in 2015, if you're doing business with the government, you were required since 2015 to be compliant with NIST 800-171. So this is not a new requirement. What we're seeing here is a new way to verify that people are actually doing what the government says they should do, and potentially have third parties or even part of the government, like the DIBCAC, may help do some assessments and make sure that people are adhering to this standard that they've legally been required to be compliant with for 7.5. Well, I think it was December when it came in 2015, 7 years, right? So they started realizing about 2020 that they didn't really know whether people were adhering to this or not. So they created the Cyber Maturity Model Certification. At the time, it was 1.0. We didn't know there was going to be a different version. So it was just the CMMC. And it was an effort to put a bunch of rigor around people either self-attesting or, more importantly, having third parties, C3PAOs, or what they're known as, but they're third-party assessors that will come in, assess you, or audit you, if you will, against the standard and provide a certification that says, in fact, you're compliant with this. And the idea was that by sometime in 2022, people were supposed to be compliant with this and be able to submit their certification to be able to bid on DoD contracts. The government realized their plan was wildly ambitious, was not fully supported, and said, we need to change this. And about a little over a year ago, they came out with version 2, which somewhat simplified the approach down from 5 levels to 3 levels. And it basically said that if you're looking at just federal contract information, you can self-attest. If you're at a higher level, let's say a level 2, that in fact, now you probably have to have a third-party assessor to work with you and certify you at least, at the beginning and every 3 years. And the idea behind this, of course, is to protect government data, right? So it's the 2 types of data that Dustin had mentioned. Federal contract information, I'm doing business with the government, and it's the DoD work. That's as simple as what can be FCI. And then the controlled unclassified information, it's the stuff that's not classified, but is still really critically important. is the stuff that you're really mostly trying to protect. And you need to build a program and a remediation plan to address any deficiencies you have. So the key to this is you need to be compliant if you want to play with the DoD. So I think it's probably about May of this year that they're really going to start looking at this as a requirement, and then they have a rollout plan, I believe 24 months long.
You mean, and Fred, you mean May of 23?
23, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then a 24-month plan where everybody needs to get certified. So the green flag is about to drop and the race is about to start. You need to plan now. You need to get ahead of this stuff. Next slide, please.
Can I just add a little color to that? Because, you know, version 1.0 came out as an executive order in 2010. And in my view, this is the federal government got to the point where it's, you know, this self-attestation stuff just doesn't work anymore. And that's where everybody is landing right now. The regulatory pressure is going up all over the place. I will point out that the group that kind of designated itself to manage CMMC has had a lot of fits and starts, and there's a tremendous amount of pushback on CMMC from the industry because it's an unfunded mandate, right? You got to put all these controls, but people suck it up because this is the way the world is going.
There you go.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that with the consulting clients we have now, where they have prime contractors and actual government agencies asking for their implementation status. They have to provide regular reports to show that they're actually either working towards compliance or where they're at with their compliance, because they need to know that their critical supply chain is good to go when they start doing the assessments.
Yeah. So let's talk about what bad things happen if you're not compliant. First off, the time will come here about May of about, I think it's 2025, when you're going to have to be compliant or you're not going to be able to submit a bid. Currently, the way they look at it is if you have a certification or working towards one, you're going to get a more favored status in terms of bidding than someone who is not compliant. But this is something you need to do. But more importantly, what happens when you have become certified, right? Well, it's not an every 3-year effort, although you need to be certified by a third party every 3 years. You need to attest annually by somebody who is, let's say, responsible for implementation of the policies to protect federal contract information and CUI. Whoever that designated individual is has a lot more responsibilities all the way up until potential civil and criminal penalties. So the company and potentially the individual may have responsibilities that go into places none of us ever would want to go with our careers. So key part is personal responsibility is now being assigned. Your organization will be debarred, which is the kind of like the contracting version of disbarment, but it's where you can't contract anymore. You're done. You're out. You're blackballed. And then if you have existing contracts and something happens, a whistleblower calls and says, hey, my company's not adhering to these things that they're claiming. I'm making a whistleblower claim, or there's an audit, or something happens. There's a breach, and all of a sudden there's an investigation, or even a freedom of information request can potentially expose information about the contract and your requirements, and people may be able to figure out that you're not compliant. So there's a lot of ways that the government can become aware of you being in a non-compliant condition, and all three of these really bad outcomes are potentially realized if you're not compliant. So you got to take this seriously. It really is, if you want to play here in this DoD space, you got to be compliant.
So question here, do whistleblowers get some fraction of a settlement if there's a settlement?
My understanding of most whistleblower laws is yes, but
right.
Dustin, you see.
So that makes this even more serious.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and
there's an incentive for people to throw you under the bus.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yes. Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, it is May of 2023. So coming up here in, just was a 7 months from now.
Yeah. It's right around the corner, folks.
Right around the corner.
So you'll start seeing CMMC put in contracts in fiscal year 24 is probably when you'll see them in actual contracts, and then it'll get phased in from there. But like I said, primes and government DoD departments are already asking about this and expecting their critical partners to do this stuff. And so the CMMC compliance process, this is just a way to break down where to start with CMMC and how to get to your certified assessment. You have to understand where the FCI and CUI is in your environment, what type you have, who's using it, the people, the places, and the systems that are storing, processing, and transmitting this information. You need to have a very clear list of what these things are, and then create a visualization, like a diagram, a flow chart of how this information is going through your environment, so you know how to actually implement these controls in your environment. Then you can create your asset inventory, your network diagram, and your SSP and your POAM, which is required for DFARS. You have to have that. It's going to be something that is used during the certified assessment, and along with all your evidence that's showing the implementation of the controls. Once you have an idea of what controls you're implementing and what controls you're not implementing, then you have your POAM list of all the controls that you need to start working on to get implemented in order to be 100% compliant. There's no matter what, you're eventually going to have to be 100% compliant. There is a 180-day period of time after your certified assessment to do certain controls. There's only a small subset of controls that you can POAM, and they're controls that are not worth 5 or 3 points. They're the 1-point controls. And so, that relates to the SPUR scoring. So the SPUR scoring has, each control has a score of 5, 3, or 1, and most of them are 5s. And so you're gonna have to focus on those and make sure you have those done, because they also provide a lot more security to your organization as well. So when you're doing your implementation, it's not about what tool do I have to buy, who do I just need to hire to just make this go away. A lot of this is something that your organization is going to have to do, and you're going to need buy-in from the top leadership down to provide resources to do these things. And so you want to look at, what are we doing now? There's a lot that you already do in your environment that meets these requirements. They might just need to be tweaked a little bit and documented and defined, because that's really what CMMC is about. Defining, documenting what you're doing, how you're meeting these controls and requirements, and then just making sure that your security culture is in line with that. And that takes time. This whole process, even for an aggressive organization with funding and leadership support, is going to take 6 months to implement this. More realistically, it's going to take a year or more. So you need to get started now if you plan on being certified in CMMC next year.
And Dustin, you and I were talking before the webinar, and one of the things you said was some folks have not done this well. They've gotten an assessment that hasn't gone well, or they've worked with somebody that didn't quite know what they were doing, and that set them back.
Yes, it's common. A lot of times what I'll see is they'll bring in a consultant that does an assessment just based off of the top level controls, and not using the actual assessment guide that has all the objective statements underneath it. You're going to be assessed on each objective statement. Each one of those, if they're not implemented, you're not compliant with that control. And so if you're just checking off the checklist of the top level controls, you're not actually doing a real assessment that you're going to be assessed on, and your SPUR score is not going to be accurate. And so if you have a SPUR score that's not accurate, that's going to create a lot of problems with your contracting officials. And so that's a big problem, just not understanding the scoping part. If you don't get scoping right from the beginning, it creates a whole bunch of problems later on, because you'll start finding these data flows of CUI that's going places outside of your boundary, different cloud systems, different MSPs, just different places in the environment on-prem. And now you have these subsystems that are not being compliant and protected. And that causes a lot of problems. You don't want to find that out when you're just getting ready to get your assessment.
Yeah, for sure. And, the other thing we're talking about is, we talked about, cybersecurity as a service, which is, what we provide, because there's stuff that you can do on your own and stuff that you need to bring in somebody else to do. Dustin, when you look at all of the stuff on the left under managed detection and response, that includes incident prep, 24/7 monitoring, incident response, and then on the right, obviously the policy and compliance work is really important. VCSO, pen testing maybe, although, not social engineering and phishing as a service, obviously vulnerability scanning, and then you have to have that risk assessment. How do you see this for clients?
So on the right there, the strategic program development, that's where you have someone come in and help you determine what is your security culture, what are you doing right now that's compliant, and what do we need to do to just shift that into being able to be compliant, defining what you're doing in policy and procedures. So that's really key to have somebody that knows how to do that. If you have it internally, great, but if you don't, look to find someone that knows how to do that and understands CMMC and knows those details. As far as penetration testing goes, that's most likely going to be a level 3 requirement. It's a good thing to do for an advanced security program, but we still don't know if that's going to be an exact requirement for level 3. Most likely it will, though, because that's part of 800-172 requirements. Vulnerability scanning, that's a level 2 requirement. You need to do that to know where your vulnerabilities are and review them and include that into your risk management program. And then so that flows right into your risk assessments. So doing an annual risk assessment, security assessment, and doing a security awareness training, those are all CMMC level 2 requirements. And then on the left with managed detection and response, that's your incident response capability. All those things work together to create a capability. So you want to have your IR plan. You want the ability to respond and report incidents to the DivNet within 72 hours. And you need people that know what they're doing and know that process. So you need to have people that can actually respond to the incident. If you have that internally, great. But if you don't, find out what your gaps are and see if you can get another piece to that puzzle to create that full capability. And that's where the MDR comes into. And that most likely will be, the MDR will be a level 3 requirement. So because you're going to need to have a 24/7 SOC with threat intelligence and the ability to respond within 24 hours.
Yeah. And, I recognize we have 2 minutes left here. So if folks have questions, put them in the chat so we can make sure to get them in here. As folks do that, I want to also put up, we've been doing Q&A. If you want to talk to us, you can email one of my colleagues, Ellie. You can call the 800 number anytime. My colleague Ginny is going to put in the chat here a survey. We do have one more thing before we go. But take the survey. For every one of the webinars we do, we get feedback and we make these better, and we appreciate your feedback. In the survey also is a place where you can either get a gift card for doing it or donate your gift card to Girls Who Code, which is a great thing to do. I think we're going to go a little bit over time here answering questions. So if you need to drop, totally get it. Otherwise, Dustin, there are some questions coming in here. Dustin, question for you. How will a DIBCAC assessment, I can't get my cursor over to it, figure into the CMMC certification?
Yeah, they're still going to be doing them. They're going to be doing level 3 assessments. So if you fall under level 3, they're going to be doing your assessment. They're also doing them for the C3PAOs right now to get them certified to be able to do these third-party assessments for level 2. And currently, and I didn't put this out before, there is voluntary assessments now. You can go out and get a voluntary assessment. It's being done jointly between DIBCAC and the small amount of C3PAOs that are approved to do these. So they do them together. And there's not very many people, not very many organizations, so it's kind of a long list to get on. But if that's something that you would want to do early on, you can do that now.
Awesome. And, let's do some quick final thoughts here. Mike, final thoughts, and then we'll go to Fred and then Dustin.
Yeah. Final thought is that this is not a lot different from all of the other regulations that are hitting all of the other sectors, and some of which have been regulated for a long time, like the payment card industry. All this now is what your insurance company expects from you. So like I said, this is just the way of the world now.
Fred, final thoughts.
Yeah, I would say if you were kind of scared by the original iterations of CMMC, know that the version 2 is a lighter lift, and it's something that's achievable, I think, for all organizations. So step into it. That's what I'd say.
All right, Dustin, final thoughts.
Where to start? get a good idea of your environment and where COI is, do scoping really well, get your leadership support, get resources for it, and have a good understanding of your security culture so that you can sustain your CMMC compliance.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. If you have questions, don't forget you can always email us. If you get in touch with me, I'll get you in touch with Dustin, Jake at criticalinsight.com, or my colleague Ellie at criticalinsight.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And on behalf of Mike and Fred and Dustin, have a great day.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.